A South Korean ferry sinks. Some 300 people remain missing. The Ukrainian military crackdown on pro-Russian militants. And the mega events fund under fire from the director of audit.
Good evening. A dramatic rescue today off the southern coast of South Korea. That's where a ferry carrying 477 passengers, mostly high school students, suddenly sank. So far, 2 people have been found dead and dozens are injured. As Sonia Artero reports, the number dead could rise as some 300 people remain unaccounted for.
Dozens of boats, helicopters, and divers were seen scrambling to rescue the masses that were being ferried to the southern island of Jeju. The ferry, identified as the Seawall, was carrying 477 passengers and crew and 150 vehicles. Among those on board were 325 high school students on a field trip. Officials say just as the ship was nearing Jeju Island, for reasons unknown, it began to list and roll on its side. That's when the South Korean Coast Guard received a distress signal. Many suspect the vessel ran aground as scores of passengers said the ship began to careen to the port side after making a banging sound on the bow. Survivors are in utter shock, citing perfectly calm conditions on the ocean when out of nowhere the ferry capsized. This student claims the moment the ferry began sucking in water, passengers tried to escape, but an announcement on board directed them to stay still. This traumatized passenger is adamant many people were still trapped inside when the ferry sank. Adding to the confusion, a senior official at the Public Administration and Security Ministry kept changing the numbers of injured and missing without elaborating. The official vowed an investigation is underway to determine what went wrong. Parents of the student passengers boarded buses to where the rescued were transferred to in the hope of learning their children made it out alive. Authorities admit the ferry went off its prearranged route as it departed some 2.5 hours later than scheduled due to a thick fog. Rescued students, many without shoes, were wrapped in blankets and tended to by emergency workers. Other students say in order to escape, they had to jump into the ocean wearing life jackets and swim to a nearby rescue boat. With the exact number of the missing still unknown, searchers are still scouring the area, but mud on the ocean floor is making underwater search operations difficult. Sonia Artero, TVB News.
The Ukrainian government says its forces repelled an attack at an airport in predominantly Russian eastern Ukraine. It's the first military action against a pro-Russian uprising and came just hours after the country's president said the government was launching an anti-terrorist operation. Alan Buchnier has more details.
Ukrainian military helicopters could be seen heading towards the Kramatorsk airport. And shortly after that, shots being fired could be heard. The precise sequence of events was mired in confusion and contradictory claims. The commander of the Ukrainian operation said about 30 gunmen in green military uniforms with no insignias tried to storm the airport but were repelled. He said there were no injuries, while a pro-Russian coordinator said 2 people were slightly hurt. Meanwhile, in the capital city, Kiev, Ukrainian acting president Oleksandr Turchinov told Parliament special forces had recaptured the airport that was being occupied by militiamen. Russia denounced the military operation, saying it was criminal to fight your own people who speak out for their legal rights. Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev said Ukraine is on the brink of civil war, calling it a scary situation. In Washington, the Obama administration gave its tacit support to the actions by the Ukrainian government.
And we agree that the use of force is not a preferred option. That said, the Ukrainian government has the responsibility to provide law and order. And these provocations in eastern Ukraine are creating a situation in which the government has to respond.
Meanwhile, in the eastern Ukrainian city of Slavyansk, where pro-Russian militias have taken over several government buildings, it's now being reported that 6 armored vehicles flying Russian flags drove into the city. One soldier claimed the unit was part of a brigade of Ukraine's military that switched sides. And in Donetsk, just 70 kilometers from Slavyansk, 2 columns of Ukrainian combat vehicles are conducting military exercises. In an effort to quell the growing tensions, foreign ministers from Russia, Ukraine, the U.S., and the European Union are scheduled to meet in Geneva on Thursday. Alan Buknia, TVB News.
The Audit Commission is calling on the government to review the Mega Events Fund. It's criticised the Tourism Commission for failing to properly manage the fund. Rani Samtani has more.
The Mega Events Fund has funded Hong Kong's hosting of more than 24 events involving nearly $100 million since it was set up 4 years ago. Football matches between Manchester United and Kitchee last July cost $8 million, but out of the 40,000 tickets available, only half were sold to the public. At a golf tournament which received $50,000 of funding, only 7% of the tickets were sold to the general public. The rest were issued as free tickets to sponsors and organizers. The Director of Audit also reported suspected irregularities in Mega Events Fund records. For an event involving a series of shows in 2010, $2.5 million was granted by the Mega Events Fund for publicity and promotion on the mainland, Macau, and the Asia-Pacific region. However, it was found that $240,000 was spent on promoting the shows in Canada. And it noted that the fund management failed to keep account of quotations, invoices, staff recruitment, and payroll records. In one case, an organizer was overpaid, but the mistake remained undetected until the Audit Commission's examination. It was also found that unused portions of government funding were never refunded, and the majority of jobs created for funded activities were extremely short-term and temporary. For a Dragon and Lion Dance event, the organizer agreed to hire a minimum of 3,000 performers. But in the end, the report found that only 1,850 people were hired. Most of them were children accompanied by their families and could not be counted as paid performers. The Director of Audit stressed the importance of bringing mega events to Hong Kong. He said that staging successful, spectacular events will not only attract more visitors, but it will also raise Hong Kong's profile as a host for international sports and arts activities. The Director of Audit called on the government to urge the Tourism Commission to conduct an overall review and to devise a stricter mechanism to review the application and verification of information submitted by the event organizers. The government said the Tourism Commission will take follow-up actions. Mega Events Fund Assessment Committee Chairman Jeffrey Lam said they are monitoring each project strictly. Rani Samtani, TVB News.
The audit report pointed out that the government could fail in meeting its housing target of 200,000 public rental flats over the next 10 years. And as Evelina Leung reports, the administration also came under fire for the ineffective use of government staff quarters.
The government has set a target of providing 200,000 public rental units over the next 10 years in its long-term housing strategy. However, according to the audit report published today, this target may not be met. The report says 79,000 public rental flats are expected to be built by 2017 and an additional 100,000 units by 2022. But that will still fall short of the target. The Director of Audit pointed out that the shortage of land supply is one of the main factors affecting the production of public rental housing. He called on the government to explore possible sources such as reclamation, site redevelopment, and opening up new areas to tackle this challenge. The audit report also criticized the government's ineffectiveness in redeveloping public housing estates. From 2001 to 2013, the government provided sites for the Housing Authority to build public housing estates. When the sites were ready, it took the Housing Department around 3.5 years to start the building work. In some cases, there was a 2 to 7 month delay. The Soi Chun O site in Sha Tin is a case in point. It was decided in 1999 that the site would be used for home ownership scheme housing development. but it was handed back to the government in 2003 for private housing development following the government's decision to put HOS flat sales on hold. Then 6 years later, the site was again redesignated for public housing, and the construction of Soichun-o Estate is now underway. The first batch of flats will be ready in the middle of the year, some 15 years after the development plan was first conceived. Besides public housing, the administration also came under fire for the ineffective use of government staff quarters. For example, the Water Supplies Department is making use of only 5 of the 75 residential units in its staff quarters in Kwai Fong. The department told the Government Property Agency in 2010 that it would like to have all its staff in 3 quarters premises, as there were many unoccupied flats. But there was no follow-up action by the agency. By December 2013, only 27 out of 254 residential units available to the department were occupied. The Director of Audit stressed the government has to step up control of these staff quarters and put unoccupied flats to use as soon as possible. Evelyn Lang, TVB News.
The robotic submarine hunting for the missing Malaysia Airlines plane was forced to resurface this morning due to an unidentified technical issue. While the Bluefin 21 has yet to find any wreckage, it's now back in full operation. This frustration and others caused relatives of the 153 missing Chinese passengers to walk out of a video conference with Malaysian officials in Kuala Lumpur. Angered by a lack of evidence the plane crashed, relatives are demanding an apology from the Malaysian Prime Minister, who announced last month that flight MH370 ended in the Indian Ocean. They also demand face-to-face meetings with Malaysian officials. Trying to lift their spirits, Malaysia's acting transport minister promised not to scale down the search, saying more countries might help.
In Canada, 5 people were killed in a stabbing rampage at a student house party near the University of Calgary. Calgary police call it the worst mass murder in the city's history. They've arrested a police officer's son, who is a student at the university. Police say he was invited to the party, and shortly after he arrived, he picked up a large knife and started stabbing the victims. There were 20 people at the party. The victims ranged from 20 to 27 in age. 3 males died at the scene and 4 other people died later in hospital. There's no word yet on the motive for the attacks.
In Boston, solemn ceremonies were held to commemorate the first anniversary of the Boston Marathon bombing. Survivors, first responders, and family members of those killed were paid tribute in ceremonies to combine sorrow for the victims and pride in Boston's resilience in the aftermath. 3 people were killed, more than 260 injured in the terrorist bomb attacks near the finish line of the marathon. There was also praise for the 36,000 runners who plan to participate in this year's race next week. There will be new restrictions and tight security for the event. Tens of thousands are expected to attend.
And still ahead in our news tonight. Debate on amendments to the appropriation bill postponed. 5 arrested in suspected fraud involving luxury car importation, and pictures of a total lunar eclipse.
In the history of MasterChef, we've never had a blind contestant. Welcome.
Anyone can be a chef.
The flavour's amazing. You've got to believe in yourself more.
But only one can be the Master Chef.
I know that I'm good enough to win this.
Are you not understanding what we're doing here?
It's a disaster.
That is disgusting. Gross.
Your worst performance in MasterChef.
I don't think that's edible.
The person leaving MasterChef and heading back home is...
Next Thursday and Friday, Master Chef at 8:30 on Pearl.